Hello, how you doing, and welcome back to the channel. So, Scott Robertson will replace Ian Foster as the All Blacks head coach following the World Cup in France later this year. This was the news that came out basically overnight here in the UK as they announced it in New Zealand. Robertson will take over following the World Cup later this year, or basically from the start of next year, and he has a contract to take him through until the end of the World Cup in Australia in 2027. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. Like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment down below. I'm going to go through how I see it as some of the negatives and also the positives. Let me know if you think this is a good or a bad appointment for the All Blacks heading forward. Scott Robertson replacing Ian Foster. All right, let's crack on with it, shall we? As I say, he replaces him after the Rugby World Cup, takes him through to Australia. Ian Foster had said that he wouldn't be reapplying to continue in the role. Really interested to how he's remembered as the All Blacks coach. I wonder whether it's going to be kind of mainly dictated to how they get on in the World Cup later this year. They obviously had that defeat to Ireland on home soil in that test series last year. They went on a run of defeats, but then they ended up winning the Rugby Championship and also finishing the year with an unbeaten tour to the Northern Hemisphere. So maybe the jury's still out on Ian Foster. What is intriguing, though, is he had asked the New Zealand Rugby Union to not appoint a new coach until after the World Cup. He didn't want it to be a distraction, I think, essentially for the All Blacks in World Cup year. So I guess the question here is, have the union done the right thing and acted decisively? And actually the fact that they've got all their ducks in order, Robertson will come in. We now know that there won't be speculation when the All Blacks are having to prepare for games in the Rugby Championship and in France in the World Cup. The fact that that won't happen, whether that's a positive thing now or the fact that Foster asked them to hold off and they haven't, will that cause some sort of tension? I wouldn't have really thought it would do, but at the same time you do just wonder, given the fact that of what he had previously said. And I also think from the union's point of view, Robertson, who's been so successful with the Crusaders, 6 Super Rugby titles, really highly touted. He'd been linked with jobs elsewhere previously as well. He was linked with the England job when Eddie Jones was fired. Maybe the New Zealand Rugby Union felt that they needed to act now and they needed to act fast and able to get him in place, lock him down so that they had him for the future and he wouldn't be poached from elsewhere. Just in terms of the other name, or the name that I saw most heavily linked with this, was Jamie Joseph, the Japan coach. And with the greatest respect to him, I feel like out of those two options, Scott Robertson is the obvious choice. So as I said, there are a lot of positives to this appointment. I'm going to come on to them in just a moment because I wanted to start with perhaps just a couple of negatives. And you guys might not even think these are negatives, but I think they're worth pointing out in terms of the discussion of where they go from here. So the negatives, and I've got those two men on screen in Graham Henry and Steve Hansen, because the most successful Kiwi coaches in recent years, you would say, have had overseas experience, whereas Scott Robertson hasn't. He's had great experience and he's been incredibly successful, but that has all been with the Crusaders. It's all been in New Zealand. How much would a coach therefore benefit of going overseas, seeing how other nations, how other teams play the game, and then bringing that back into New Zealand rugby for them to be as successful as possible? It's something that previously they've clearly done, and they've done really, really well with those two guys that I mentioned. But I think it's something that perhaps is just worth bearing in mind. I don't necessarily think it's going to be the case, because I just think we've got a body of work in front of us of complete dominance in Super Rugby, and therefore I'm not looking at him thinking, well, he really needed to go abroad and learn his stripes elsewhere to be able to improve as a coach. He's clearly a very, very good coach. I don't think that that is going to be any sort of issue, but maybe it's just an interesting point to raise. The other point that I did see in one of the articles I read is, and this seems incredibly unfair to me, I don't agree with it, is the suggestion that the Crusaders have such a good catchment area, they have so much talent available to them, that automatically the job of the coach is made easier. And that may be true, but I still think the job of the coach has to form those players into a team, has to make them into a cohesive unit, has to build on the game plan. I don't think you win 6 Super Rugby titles by just being able to have loads of good players. Don't get me wrong, it's clearly a benefit because the Crusaders are consistently, even before Robertson was in charge, one of the forces to deal with in Super Rugby. But I think it's more than that. I think it would be unfair to hold that against him when he's had good players available to him. And I also think if you look at some other coaches, if we want to talk about I don't know, a Todd Blackadder, for example, who was previously coached the Crusaders, got to a couple of Super Rugby finals, losing them both, lost in semi-finals and things like that, couldn't quite get over that hurdle. The consistency with which Robertson has been able to win I think is something to be admired rather than something that potentially gets held against him in this case. I think that would be unfair, but you can let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's enough of the negatives. Let's get on to the positives. And there's two things here. Number one is that photo right there. He has racked up a bucket load of Super Rugby titles. As I've already mentioned, he's won 6 of them, but the Crusaders, during his tenure, have just been the most dominant, the most consistent force in club rugby domestically in the Southern Hemisphere. And as I've said already, he kind of has been able to do what other coaches weren't, in that the Crusaders have always been good. They've won titles here and there, but he has turned them into this year after year, just winning machine. And the way in which he's done that has been brilliant. And that also brings me on, excuse me, to the photo down here. I think he is a guy who is a player's coach, in that we see him breakdancing when they win trophies, and we all love it. It's hilarious. We get all of that. But it also kind of speaks to, I guess, the culture that he harvests, what he brings to a role. I mean, how many other coaches would you see trying to breakdance after winning a trophy with all the squad, all the staff, coaching staff, backroom staff around, and absolutely loving that moment? I think that always gives us a little snapshot into the kind of culture that he harvests. And the All Blacks job is a huge job in New Zealand. It comes with a massive amount of pressure. And I think the fact that he's that sort of character, quite laid back, I know people always quoted previously as saying that he loves being able to go surfing before he goes to work each day, or that sort of thing. He's a laid-back character. He's clearly loved by his players, as that demonstrates. And I think, therefore, that's a really positive thing for an All Blacks coach to have, given the kind of pressure that can come with that role. So that's my kind of general thoughts on Scott Robertson. As I say, I think it's a positive appointment. I think it's an appointment that completely makes sense. I heard a lot of people saying they would like him to take charge of England when Eddie Jones got sacked. And the fact that he's going to New Zealand, it kind of feels like the job he was always meant to get, right? Like, he's always been touted for other jobs and nothing's ever materialised. But then the All Blacks job comes along. And in fact, he applied for it previously, didn't he? He applied for it back in 2019, or when they were doing the recruitment process, when Ian Foster got it. He applied for it, didn't get it. So now you just feel like it is his time. It is the job that he has been working towards. It is the job that I think people have expected him to take on. And I think it is a job that he will do very, very well at. But let's wait and see. Drop a comment down below and let me know what you think of Scott Robertson becoming the next All Blacks head coach. Good appointment, bad appointment, positives, negatives, everything I mentioned in this video. Drop a comment down below. And also, if you feel obliged, I'll be really appreciative if you can like the video and also subscribe to the channel as well. Keep an eye out as well for more content coming your way. Still loads of Six Nations reaction to get into. But as always, I'll see you in the next one.